to Power Policy and Progress, the podcast where politics, policy, and the stories shaping our future take center stage. I'm Madison Maynard, and we are coming to you at a moment where there's a lot of hostility in American politics. The traditional playbooks for both major parties aren't just outdated, they are being systematically dismantled as we speak. Today, we are taking a hard, data driven look at the ideological earthquakes rewriting the rules of governance from coast to coast. First, we break down the explosive aftermath of last week's New York primary races. Mayor Zohran Mamdani and a hyper disciplined DSA, Democratic Socialist of America, ground game orchestrated a total left wing sweep, sending a wave of anti establishment firebrands to Congress. Now, a fierce centrist counter-offensive has erupted as moderate Democrats issue a blunt ultimatum to their own party. We are capitalists, not socialists. Then we head north to look at a fascinating poll from the New York Times on the polling, which shows progressive candidate Graham Plattner, who I've been very, very critical of. He is holding a razor thin 2 point lead over six-term Republican incumbent Susan Collins. We look at why voters are holding their noses, balancing deep anxieties over Plattner's personal scandals against a deep desire for Democratic control of the Senate. Then we flip the map to deep red Texas, where another shocker has emerged. As we've discussed, mainstream conservative John Cornyn was ousted by MAGA firebrand Ken Paxton in a brutal primary, but Paxton's heavy personal baggage has really put this race in some jeopardy for the Republican Party. I mean, Democrat James Talarico has forced the race into an absolute dead heat tie, opening up a historic generation defining frontline in the Lone Star State. We'll also expose a quiet, stunning overhaul in American immigration policy under a sweeping suspension of global humanitarian aid. The Trump administration has engineered a fast track exception specifically for white South African Afrikaners, raising intense legal and ethical outcries over a refugee system being used to advance a political and racial agenda. Finally, we head to Washington, where the Supreme Court has just wrapped up a blockbuster term. In a series of dramatic 6-3 rulings, the justices handed a major defeat in the White House by striking down the president's birthright citizenship ban, while simultaneously delivering mass victories to conservatives by dismantling campaign finance limits and upholding state bans on transgender female athletes. All of that and more coming up on Power Policy and Progress. Let's get right into it. If the Democratic establishment was hoping to quietly sweep last week's historic progressive primary surge under the rug, they just got a brutal reality check. A massive, bitter, ideological civil war has officially erupted for the soul of the Democratic Party. Alarmed by the slate of Democratic Socialist victories in New York and Washington, D.C., centrist Democrats are staging a fierce counteroffensive led by Representative Tom Suozzi, who famously flipped a Long Island swing district. A coalition of moderate lawmakers released a scathing manifesto titled The Promise of America. Their explicit, blunt message to the insurgent wing of their own party: we are capitalists, not socialists. Moderates like Suozzi and Democratic Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, are warning that the far left is handing Donald Trump and the GOP powerful ammunition to paint the entire party as extreme heading into the midterms. But Democratic Socialists of America are firing back, calling those Red Scare tactics an outdated defense of a broken status quo. And nowhere is the status quo shifting faster than on foreign policy. Activists are declaring a massive permanent realignment in American politics as pro-Palestinian organizers successfully convert street protesters into raw electoral power. All three newly minted New York primary victors ran on hardline platforms, openly criticizing Israel's military actions in Gaza as genocide, explicitly targeting incumbents backed by AIPAC. This brings pressure squarely to the doorstep of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who is posed to become the first Black Speaker of the House if Democrats flip the chamber this fall. Jeffries now faces an agonizing legislative test that mirrors the exact factional warfare that made the House Republican majority ungovernable. After this are already floating 2028 primary challenges to Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, while incoming firebrands like Avia Chevalier are pointedly refusing to pledge their votes to Jeffries for Speaker of the House. With over 80% of Democrats and Democrat leaning independents now holding an unfavorable view of Israel, according to Pew Research, Jeffries is trapped between a base demanding an end to military aid and moderates warning that appeasing the far left will flatten the party nationally. Progressives insist they are here to pass laws, not just break things. But the math doesn't lie. If the Democratic majority is razor thin this November, the insurgent left won't just have a voice, they will hold the gavel hostage. So, my opinion is, and my analysis on all of this is moderates should speak up that the entire party does not align with DSA, right? I think, especially since we know President Trump, we know Fox News, we know the GOP, Newsmax, etc., right wing media, independent media, they will use socialism against the Democratic Party in future elections, specifically 2026 and 2028, to make Democrats seem too extreme and too far to the left, right? And it's true that the majority of the party doesn't align with DSA on the national level. It hasn't resonated with the majority of Democratic voters, specifically Black voters, who are a large demographic of the Democratic Party. And we cannot forget that. Black voters, on average, do not agree with Democratic socialism. They are more aligned with Democratic capitalism. But that does not mean that DSA shouldn't have a voice in the party at all, right? New York City and DC voters connected with the message of DSA candidates in their districts, and that should not be overlooked or diminished, okay? It really shouldn't. Especially with the issue of Israel and the genocide in Gaza, many Democratic voters are disappointed in establishment Democrats for not speaking out against the Israeli government, and they do not like that they support sending our taxpayer dollars to Israel, right? And this is not a far left thing. This is across the board. You can say that for Democrats and Republicans. So this is not a far left thing. This is not an extreme issue. Many Americans don't like that billions of our taxpayer dollars are going to Israel, right? It is critical that the Democratic Party remains a big tent. So it doesn't necessarily turn into what MAGA turned into with the Republican Party, right? I mean, we see with MAGA, we see the Republican Party, there's absolutely no diversity within the party. It's basically a cult. And do we want the Democratic Party to mirror MAGA and the Republican Party when it comes to basically being a cult and everyone has to think the same or you're out? No, that's not what the Democratic Party should be. So I welcome DSA to be in the Democratic Party, but I also understand why moderates are speaking out and saying that this is not what majority of us think or feel. Also, I don't love that Darliza Chevalier, I don't love that she is threatening to not vote for Hakeem Jeffries to be the first speaker, the first Black speaker of the House. You can disagree with some of his policies, but the Democratic Party has to come together to support a Black man to lead the party to fight against President Trump and MAGA. And once he's in, then you can speak with him about your disagreements. But to not vote for him when he could become the first Black speaker of the House is pretty disappointing. And I think once he's in there, once there's a blue wave and Hakeem Jeffries becomes the first Black Speaker of the House, then you can say, this is what I disagree with. What can we do to come together as a party to ensure that policies are working for the American people? So I really hope that she changes her mind if she wins, which she will win in her district. But I hope that she changes her mind in November. So we'll see the party dealing with some growing pains for a few months, especially after these victories. But like I said last episode, majority of Democrats, I don't believe align with DSA. I don't align with DSA. I think that there are many districts across the country that are Democratic leaning or are Democratic districts, and they would not vote in a DSA candidate. They would vote for just a classic liberal candidate or a more moderate candidate. And I think that there's nothing wrong with having more moderate views or having more centrist views, but there's also nothing wrong with having more far left views. I think that the Democratic Party should be a big tent. And I'll do an episode really diving into why I don't agree with DSA. But I just really just for these last few episodes, I'm really discussing the politics of this. But I will dive into what I disagree with personally with DSA. But the main thing I agree with DSA on is their stance on Israel and the fact that they're committing a genocide in Gaza. I think that is a large reason why they won so many districts across the country. And I think that also that could hurt them in some districts that might be more moderate. You know, it really just depends on where you are in the country. So that's just my opinion. So let's move on to Maine. So there has been a lot of polling in the Maine Senate race. There's been fresh polling from the New York Times, Portland Press Herald, and Siena University, which has revealed a neck and neck, razor thin sprint developing in Maine. Graham Plattner holds a 49% to 47% lead over six-term Republican incumbent Susan Collins. On paper, Maine should be fertile ground for Democrats. It is the only targeted Republican held seat in the country that voted against Donald Trump in 2024. And 54% of likely voters explicitly say they want Democrats to control the Senate next year. But Plattner is facing a severe personal headwind that is preventing him from locking it down. Over 90% of likely voters have heard about the steady drumbeat of controversies dogging his past, including unsettling allegations of misconduct towards women, a covered up Nazi tattoo, and explicit marital text messages. The data reveals a fascinating moral catch-22 for the electorate. Only 44% of Mainers believe Plattner has good character, compared to 66% who say the same for Collins. In fact, a massive 29% of Plattner's own supporters admit these scandals make them actively question their vote. Yet the 73-year-old Collins has major liabilities of her own. A definitive 54% majority of likely voters, including 57% of critical independents, fear she will be too supportive of President Trump's second term agenda. And while voters trust Collins to deliver federal resources to the state by a staggering 61% to 34% margin, Plattner holds a clear lead when it comes to being a genuinely independent voice. Voters are telling us that they are holding their noses, balancing anxieties over Plattner's total lack of political experience against fears that Collins lacks a spot in. Collins has a legendary history of outrunning her polls in Maine, but in an environment where her party's national approval is underwater, this race is going down to the absolute wire. So the moral of the story is both of these candidates are absolutely horrible, and it sucks because Democrats need this victory in Maine. It's a step closer to the possibility of a blue wave in the midterms if Maine is victorious for the Democratic Party. It is a step closer to the possibility of a blue wave in the midterms. Polls like I said, tend to underestimate Collins, so there is still a chance that she is victorious. The fact that more Mainers believe that Collins has a better moral ground and has better character than Plattner is telling, because many believe she is spineless when it comes to Trump, and that's definitely true. I agree with that. But Mainers believe that she has better character because she doesn't have a Nazi tattoo. She hasn't made derogatory remarks about Black people, the LGBTQ plus community, and Purple Heart recipients. Not that I know of. I mean, she's a Republican, so she's backing Trump, who is a white supremacist. When you vote for Trump, of course, but has she explicitly made derogatory remarks like Graham Plattner has? I don't believe that to be true. And they know that Plattner has a horrible past with women. And of course, Collins, she votes too often with Trump, but that doesn't mean that people should just overlook Plattner's horrible character. Two things can be true. Collins is spineless, and Graham Plattner has a horrific past with women. He's racist. He has made derogatory remarks left and right. And I don't even think that all of the posts that he's made have been released. I think more are probably going to be coming out soon. So this is going to be a difficult choice for Maynard. I don't blame Democratic voters. I just want to make this clear. I don't blame Democratic voters for supporting Plattner because they want the Senate to go blue. I understand that. I completely understand that we are living in unprecedented times right now, and we need a blue wave to happen. So I understand why people would want to support Plattner, because they want the Senate to go blue. And they believe that voting for Plattner is worth having a blue wave. And that makes sense to me. Even though Plattner, I will never defend Plattner. If I was in Maine, I don't know what I would do. I've said this in the previous podcast. I don't know what I would do if I was living in Maine. I really don't. But I understand why people are voting for Plattner, just because they want checks and balances. They want the Senate to go blue. They want the House to go blue so that there are checks and balances, because right now there are literally none, literally zero. The president is able to do whatever he wants, and the Supreme Court is like, yup. So I completely understand. And so I'm not here to judge people that vote for Graham Plattner, but also don't judge me and other people for saying that it would be a really difficult decision to vote for Graham Plattner. It just would be a difficult decision. For me, it wouldn't just be like, yeah, I'm so happy to vote for Graham Plattner. No, it would be such a difficult decision for me. As a Black woman, it would be difficult for me to do that. It just would. So it's a difficult choice, and I commend Mainers for dealing with this difficult choice that they're dealing with, and it'll be hard for many people to look the other way when it comes to Graham Plattner. And it's understandable. Completely understandable. Now let's turn to Texas. So for the first time in a generation, Democrats are within striking distance of a statewide victory in deep red Texas. A brand new New York Times stand-up poll reveals that the race for the United States Senate is deadlocked in an absolute tie with Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton and Democratic State Representative James Talrico, each polling exactly 47% of likely voters. Texas hasn't elected a Democrat to the Senate since the 1990s, and National Party strategists initially viewed the seat as a long shot, but the dynamic completely changed after Paxton, a MAGA firebrand heavily backed by President Trump, ousted mainstream incumbent John Cornyn in a brutal multi-million-dollar primary. Now Paxton's expensive baggage is dragging the ticket down. Some 80% of Texans are aware of his history of indictment, impeachment, and infidelity, leaving him with a dismissal 38% character favorability rating. The poll exposes something very interesting. Women are backing Talrico by an 18-point margin, while men favor Paxton by the exact same layout. Crucially, the 37-year-old Paxton, who is currently training to be a minister, is commanding 61% of the Hispanic vote, falling back critical ground 2 years after President Trump carried that demographic in the state. Puerto Rico is also dominating independents by 27 percentage points. However, the map highlights just how steep the climb remains for Democrats in a state where 50% of voters still want a Republican controlled Senate. While Rico is sweeping urban centers and has raised a massive $40 million through Maine, Paxton is absolutely crushing him 2-1 in rural areas. Republicans are also aggressively fighting back, blasting Rico's progressive theological statements and trying to paint him as too far to the left. With pocketbook issues driving 28% of the electorate, Rico is betting big on widespread frustration over inflation. Paxton may still hold the traditional conservative edge, but this dead heat tie is forcing national Republicans to reckon with a possible loss. It would be a glorious miracle if Texas goes blue this midterm cycle. And the chances are slightly higher with Rico as the Democratic nominee and Paxton as the Republican nominee. With Paxton's approval rating being so low and with all of his controversies, it is clear that Trump endorsed the weakest candidate out of the two, betting for the nomination, Cornyn versus Paxton. And with Rico winning the women vote and the Hispanic vote and the independent vote, he has a lot of demographics that are needed to pull a victory, right? However, Rico now needs to win the Black voters that supported Jasmine Crockett in the Democratic primary. Of course, he has to do this on his own. He needs to go to those Black communities that really went out for Jasmine Crockett. I mean, the amount of people that turned out for that Democratic primary, it was historic numbers. So Rico needs to go to the Black communities that turned out for Jasmine Crockett. He needs to knock on those doors and galvanize the voters who supported Jasmine Crockett. That is a must. That is essential for him to win. He did make a pitch to Black voters in the Texas Democratic Convention, but he needs to do more than that because the voters who supported Crockett will push Rico over the edge to victory in Texas. I also believe that Crockett should campaign with Rico. Obviously, she's upset with her loss and understandably so. I mean, especially with all of the racist and sexist attacks and many people not even voting for her, not giving her a chance because she was a Black woman and they didn't think that she would win. I understand why she, at this point in time, isn't just out there campaigning for Rico. She's still dealing with the loss of her election, and that's valid, especially with the hostility towards her when she was running. However, it is incredibly important for Crockett to speak up more in support of Rico in the coming weeks, in the coming months, even though she already endorsed him. Let me just get that straight. She already publicly endorsed him. But if she campaigns alongside him, that could really help him get those Black voters that turned out for Jasmine Crockett. So I really think that it is important for her to eventually go to those Black communities and basically convince them to vote for Rico and say we understand the pain that, we lost this race in the primary, but now is the time to come together as a Democratic Party to support James Rico as a nominee, especially since he's going up against such a weak candidate in Ken Paxton. So Rico also needs to understand the importance of the Black vote. And to me, it's unclear if he understands the importance because during the primary, he was mainly focusing on white voters and Hispanic voters and didn't really pay that much attention to the Black vote. That is why Jasmine Crockett did so well with the Black vote and Rico didn't really do that well with the Black vote. But now James Rico needs to sit down with Jasmine Crockett, in my opinion. They need to have a conversation on how to galvanize Black voters. He needs to be receptive of that. And he needs to listen to Jasmine Crockett because she won a lot of votes. and they could go out together and campaign for a Democrat, first and foremost, to be victorious in Texas. It is that important. It is that necessary for them to come together and do something about it, right? So I think that Jasmine Crockett would be a great asset to the Talarico team if the Talarico team is willing and the Talarico team wants to understand the importance of the black vote and wants to win over the black vote. It would be incredibly pivotal and incredibly important for Jasmine Crockett to campaign with Talarico, and they come together to basically bridge the gap, come together as a coalition, and fight against MAGA, because that's what their fight should be. The fight should be with MAGA and Ken Paxton and Donald Trump. That should be what their fight is. So I think if they come together, they could do that. So now we will turn to a striking, quiet overhaul of American immigration policy that critics are now calling absolute moral and legal inversion of the nation's humanitarian mission. Following a sweeping suspension of global refugee admissions, the Trump administration has quietly engineered a fast-track exception specifically for white South Africans. Under the guiding administration principle that white people are being very badly treated by our modern civil rights and equity laws, the United States refugee program has been fundamentally reshaped. Wow, they're treated so badly, guys. Like, this is such a crisis, and they're going through a genocide and all that. It's all lies, people. It's all lies. The data highlights a near total demographic freeze, while thousands of vetted families fleeing active war zones to Afghanistan, Sudan, and Ukraine remain locked out in refugee camps. The State Department has admitted more than 6,600 refugees this fiscal year. The staggering reality, all but 3 of them were from South Africa, with government documents confirming the administration has explicitly prioritized white Afrikaners. The administration defends the pivot by arguing it is in the nation's interest to prioritize refugees who can quickly assimilate, pointing to targeted violence against white farmers. However, South African officials and independent researchers strongly reject claims of a systematic white genocide. White South Afrikaners are not facing more violent crime than anybody else. South Africa's own 2024 data shows that while violence is a severe issue and it's a severe national crisis, it is not racially targeted. In fact, white citizens make up just 7.5% of the population, but still hold 61% of top management posts. Many of those arriving admit they are fleeting disillusion. Some left behind luxury vehicles and real estate valued at over $300,000, but are migrating because of post-apartheid economic equity laws, which impacted their business profits. The Fast Track program also exposed massive cracks in the administration's strict ideological vetting. While the White House publicly vows to bar immigrants with anti-American or anti-Semitic social media histories, Fast Track refugees have been admitted despite documented online posts calling Jewish people untrustworthy and dangerous. As the administration continues to roll out the red carpet based on a political agenda of reverse racism, the traditional definition of refugee has been completely rewritten. The golden door is still open, but the entry requirements have been fundamentally changed. This is clearly a racist policy because the president of the United States and the GOP does not want black and brown refugees to come into this country. They only want white South Africans who are not even being oppressed, and they are not facing a genocide because they're not even being murdered at a high rate. They're not being murdered because of their race. They're not facing a genocide in South Africa. None of that is true at all. And just just for us to really put things together. Remember the apartheid that happened in South Africa in the 1980s, right? where Black people were actually treated as second class citizens in South Africa, and white people had every single advantage in the country of South Africa to thrive, succeed, all that because of the apartheid state in South Africa. So now you want me to believe that 2026 now is reversed, and now there's a apartheid against the white South Afrikaners, and now they're facing a genocide. Now they're being murdered because of their race, and now they have to flee to the United States because of the oppression that they're facing in South Africa. Give me a break. If you're struggling with, and also they're saying, oh, we're struggling with economics and all this stuff. None of that is true because, like I said, the evidence is that they still hold 61% of top management posts, even though they make up 77.5, not 70, sorry, 7.5% of the population. And like I said, many left behind luxury vehicles and expensive real estate, all that. But if it's true that you are dealing with all this economic turmoil and you're being murdered and all these things, and it's just such a hard environment to be white in South Africa, that's on you, okay? Because you should be still reeling the effect of the apartheid in South Africa. You should be still reeling the effect of that still in 2026. If you are struggling in all this, that's on you, white South Afrikaner who is saying that they're struggling all this stuff. That's on you if you are not thriving in South Africa, because everything was given to you for you to thrive. Everything was given to you as a white South Afrikaner to thrive. You don't even make up 10% of the population, and you still have so many benefits in the country. You still have hundreds of thousands of dollars of real estate and all these luxury cars and this, that, and the third. So I'm confused about how you're supposedly oppressed. I'm confused. If you are like struggling all of these things, that's on you. Okay, that's on you because everything was given to you. An apartheid state was created so that you could benefit from white supremacy. So if you're not benefiting from that, that's on you. I'm just saying, that's on you. And for the Trump administration and for the GOP to say that they want refugees to come into this country that can better assimilate is also an incredibly racist statement. They're basically saying that white people will come in and contribute to this society and be great, upstanding citizens, great American citizens. They'll basically just fit right in. But Black and brown people, nope, they won't do the same. That's racism. That's racist, people. That's racist. The racism is so obvious at this point. I need MAGA to just admit that they're racist at this point. And that's why they're allowing only white refugees who are leaving behind luxury items into this country. It's so obvious at this point, the racism is insane. There are refugees from other countries who are desperately in need to seek asylum, but nope. The Trump administration needs to make room for the white people, everyone. It's sad. It's absolutely horrible. So we'll keep following the story. It's absolutely disgusting, truly. So to wrap up this episode, we're going to discuss that today was a pretty historic day at the nation's highest court. The Supreme Court has just wrapped up a monumental term heavily dominated by the Trump administration's boundary-pushing policies, issuing definitive blockbuster rulings on birthright citizenship, campaign finance, and transgender rights. We begin with a major defeat for the White House in a divided 6-3 decision in Trump v. Barbara. The High Court struck down President Trump's signature executive order that sought to deny automatic birthright citizenship to children born on United States soil to undocumented parents. Chief Justice John Roberts, joined by the liberal bloc and Trump appointees Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, strongly reaffirmed the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause. This decision aligns with public sentiment. A recent SCOTUS poll shows that 63% of Americans overall, including 68% of independents, believe that the president's citizenship ban violated the Constitution, because it does. And however, national Republicans are celebrating a massive parallel victory in NRSC versus FEC. In another 6-3 ruling, the conservative majority completely dismantled limits on how much political parties can spend on advertising in direct coordination with candidates. This completely undercuts a critical financial advantage for Democrats whose candidates typically outraise Republicans. Now, GOP national committees and super PACs can directly access low cost candidate television ad rates just in time for the fall midterms, even though 79% of the public actually supports maintaining those campaign finance limits. And finally, the court issued a watershed ruling on LGBTQ plus rights, voting 6-3 along ideological lines to uphold state laws in West Virginia and Idaho that bar transgender female athletes from competing on girls and women's sports teams. The decisions have immediate nationwide implications for 25 other states with similar restrictions. It also mirrors a deep cultural divide. While 55% of Democrats view these sports bans as a constitutional violation, an overwhelming 89% of Republicans and 72% of independents say that the bans do not violate transgender students' rights. The High Court has spoken, handing major victories to both sides of the aisle and completely resetting the legal landscape heading into November. So, firstly, finally, the Supreme Court is following the Constitution and not Trump with their birthright citizenship ruling. Finally, right? Like, who would have thought? It's in the Constitution that if you're born in this country, you are an American citizen. Trump tried to defy the Constitution with his executive order to deny automatic birthright citizenship, but the Supreme Court upheld the Constitution like they are supposed to, but they have rarely done such. So thank you for finally having a brain and a heart and all of the above. Secondly, the Supreme Court then goes right back to being Trump's minions by purposely changing campaign finance limits to give Republicans an advantage and Democrats a disadvantage. We know that's what it's all about, right? We know that's what it's about. The Supreme Court started off with redistricting to give Republicans an advantage and Democrats a disadvantage. And now is this. It's very calculating. It's very clear. We're going to see more court rulings doing such. We're going to see more court rulings giving a Republican candidates and the Republican Party an advantage and not the Democratic Party. And Democrats are going to keep having disadvantages because of Supreme Court rulings. It just is what it is. And lastly, I knew that the Supreme Court would rule this way with removing transgender girls from girls' sports and transgender women from women's sports, etc., because it's a very conservative Supreme Court. And I just hate that this became such a political issue when this doesn't affect the majority of Americans in the slightest. In the slightest. Transgender girls competing in girls' sports is not that important of an issue. I'll just say it. It's just not. But Republicans made it one of their many culture war topics. And what's funny is that Republicans love to accuse Democrats of being obsessed with culture wars, obsessed with identity politics. No, Republicans are the ones obsessed with identity politics. Republicans are the ones obsessed with culture wars. And this trans girls and girls sports issue is a prime example of that. And people are saying that they were voting Republican solely because of trans girls playing in girls sports. That's insane. If that was your number one issue voting in 2024 and past elections, if that was your main issue and not affordability, not cost of living, not cost of gas, not cost of rent, not reproductive health care, things that actually impact lives, gun reform, like anything else, you none of that matters to you. What your number one issue is trans girls and girls sports and trans women and women's sports. That's dumb. That's stupid. And I just think that that's ridiculous. So Republicans are the ones that are obsessed with culture wars and all of these talking points about, and trans girls are taking over girls' sports. And before we know it, there won't be any more girls' sports. It will all just be girls pretending to be men, and all of the completely hateful comments that they like to make, the completely derogatory comments that they like to make against the transgender movement, against the transgender community. I mean, I just think that it's sad that you care this much about this issue, and actually care about affordability and issues that impact most Americans. So I just want everyone listening to know Republicans are the ones that care about culture wars. Don't listen to the lies that they like to spread on Fox News and other right wing spaces saying that it's Democrats. They're the ones that are obsessed with it because they've been focusing on this whole transgender girls completing and girls sports thing for years. Riley Gaines became a MAGA star because of it, because she competed against a transgender woman who won against her, and she had a whole hissy fit and decided to make this her life mission to be transphobic. And she just made it her life mission. So she became a MAGA star. So they're the ones obsessed with it, not Democrats. Democrats just care about human rights. That's the truth. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning into Power, Policy, and Progress from Madison Maynard. I really hope that you enjoyed today's discussion. Please tune in on Thursday. I'll be back with my boyfriend, Cameron Phillips. We are going to be reacting to some news clips, so stay tuned. So watch that on Thursday. In the meantime, make sure to follow me on Instagram at Power, Policy, and Progress Podcast, and follow me on TikTok at Power, Policy, Progress Pod for online content. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please follow, subscribe, and rate the podcast, preferably 5 stars, to show your support. And of course, join the conversation. Leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts on today's topics. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you again for listening. I am Madison Maynard, and you're listening to Power, Policy, and Progress. I'll see you next time.